So I'm Dermot from Me Too. Me Too is an audience engagement app for Q&A and live polling that we're going to be using on this stand so that you can ask questions of the various presenters today. Now, what you can see over here is the instructions for getting onto Me Too. So on your smartphone or tablet or laptop, whatever you want to be using, you go to web.metoo.com, that's 2 E's and 2 O's, and then our meeting ID is that 9-digit code there, which is 168-640-085, and that will be the code all day for this conference and creativity stage. So anytime you come back, you'll just be able to go back into that app and ask some questions. And then just to make sure that everybody's getting on okay, what we're asking you here is to enter one word that best describes EventTech Live so far this year, and then just press the send button to submit. So that poll will be open as soon as you actually join the session. So we've got a couple more minutes before we start this one, so it'd be really good to get a few words up there on our word cloud. And as you can see also, as you'll be entering some other Q&A stuff, that will then come in on the left-hand side here. But once we close the poll, you'll see the Q&A nice and sensibly. Yes. Hi guys, you want to come down, grab a seat and get the headphones on. You can also see on the seats there is a card with the instructions that you can see on the banner over there as well. Just use the controls. You can just do hide at the bottom. Okay, so for those of you that have just arrived, again, I'm Dermot from Me Too, and just to let you know the way to ask some questions during this session, you will be able to do it the old-fashioned way, but because you can ask them throughout the session, just go to web.metoo.com and then enter that 9-digit code when the app asks you to. And as I said, we're just asking you a quick intro poll at the moment, which is enter one word to best describe EventTech Live so far. So if you do that, and then we'll be able to see how many people we've got on there, and got some good words coming in. Awesome, I'm sure the team here will be really pleased to know that. And coffee, not enough coffee yet by the sound of things. Hi guys, there's a couple of spaces just at the front here. We've got 1 minute to go, so again, just for those people that might have just joined us, once you've got your headsets on, get your smartphones out, and can you hear okay? Is it not? Does anybody know how that? No, I think there's the headsets. Hello, can you hear? Is that working now? You hear better like that? Okay, that's fine. Brilliant. Okay, just again, everybody, go to web.metoo.com on your smartphones, enter that 9-digit code, you'll be able to see it the whole time, and that's the way you'll be able to ask some questions throughout the session. So, I think we're on time. Our first session today is GDPR for the event lifecycle, and we've got Arvi Virdee from Phylon, and he's going to be taking us through his session. So, Arvi, please come up. Thanks very much.
Hi, you can all hear me? Great. Thank you very much for listening in on this particular subject. I know it's not the sexiest subject, but it's something we all need to be aware of. I'm sure you've had it up to here with GDPR over the last 6 months or so. I guess you're all from organizations, so a quick show of hands. How many of your organizations are GDPR compliant? Wow, impressive. Good stuff. And how many of you have never heard of GDPR? Impressive as well. Fantastic. Okay, so I made an assumption here that most of you are event organizers or event planners. So I'm just going to walk through the events life cycle from an event planner's viewpoint. Before that, I just want you to think about the delegates journey. Okay, so people who attend your event. And before that as well, a quick disclaimer, what I'm going to tell you now is purely for informational purposes. If you want more details, by all means, come and talk to me afterwards, because basically what Phylum does is we are a data privacy consultancy specializing in event management, the event management industry. Okay, so let's just start about thinking about the delegates journey. Very simple example, you came here to this event today. Okay, so if we think in terms of those of your steps, you received an invitation, you responded to it, you registered online, and then you got confirmation, you downloaded the app. From the app, you've got information about all the other people attending here. Yeah, so you've got a hold of a lot of personal data. And just to clarify, just in case people aren't clear, GDPR is all about personal data, right? Managing personal data and how you look after it and what you can do with it and what you can't do with it. Very simple example, what's personal data? That is personal data. It's as simple as that. Anything that can identify a person, name, company name is all you need, okay? So in your journey, you may have entered your personal data in many places, and that's why I just want you to think through the delegates journey. They come on site, there's a check, they check in, the badge is printed as we walked in there, right? Again, that's your personal data has gone from your registration online to a badging company, yeah? And now, as you walk around the event, you go to different stalls, you get people scan you. Again, that's your personal data is being captured by someone else. Okay, and then at the end of the event, you get event feedback. You go home. Now, if we add another layer to this, and that is that if you traveled here and you stayed at a hotel, all part of the event, just think about all the other additional layers of personal data being shared with various companies. So that's just your personal data. Think of that and all the different touch points. So with that in mind, let's walk through the event planner's viewpoint when it comes to planning events and managing personal data. So we're just going to walk through the life cycle and start with pre-event. Not enough time in this session to go through the principles of GDPR and what it actually means. I just want to focus on the main one in the middle, in yellow, is accountability. Okay, so I'll come back to that, but basically what GDPR says is that if you hold other people's personal data, there's certain things you can and can't do with it, but ultimately you are accountable for it, yeah, and you must use it transparently. So those are the two key words, transparency and accountability. So coming back onto our events life cycle. Okay, so during the planning phase, again, there's a what I call a event supply chain, which I'll talk to in a second. But in many cases here, I'm sure you work for agencies, so you manage events on behalf of clients. So you might get a new client brief, and then you've got to start the sourcing process, the supplier management, logistics, collateral. It might be a pharma client. So on top of GDPR, you might have to think about HCP compliance, the whole communications for the event. So the event planning stage starts. And within that, there's one particular area I want to really concentrate on. Hopefully you can see that at the back. This is what I call a events supply chain. Okay, so what I mentioned is some of you will be clients in that you are the end user. It's your event, which is being managed by an agency or created by an agency who will use multiple suppliers, right? They'll use hotels, they'll use transfer companies, they'll use DMCs, and those suppliers might use other suppliers as well. For example, a DMC in a location which you've never been to before might use local suppliers for transportation or hotels. All right? So what GDPR says is a couple of things very important to stress on this slide. One is the transfer of data. You can see invitation lists, delegate lists, transport lists are all lists of people, personal data, yeah, which I guarantee most of you probably just send those via Outlook or Gmail without thinking twice about security. What GDPR says that all those lists must be sent encrypted. right? So if your company doesn't have an encryption solution, it's a question to go and ask your management or your IT services. Similarly, coming back the other way, you have activity reports, reservation numbers, registration reports. So that's quite typical exchange of data. So one aspect is a transfer of data. The other is under GDPR, I mentioned the word accountability and transparency. Yeah. Whoever you share your data with, the delegate list, the attendee list, you are accountable, but so are they. Which means you need to have contracts in place with each of the suppliers if you're sending them a delegate list, yeah, that they can only handle the data for a particular purpose, and that is the reason that you are engaging with them in the first place. They can't take that data and sell it or do anything else with it. Okay, so coming back to the events lifecycle, you've done the planning. Key part is registration. All right. So you've got an event website, you've got the invitation process, you've got forms. For this particular event, you've got travel and accommodation you need to organize, speakers, group bookings. In the blue over there are GDPR aspects you have to think about during this life cycle. Okay, so a privacy policy that says, right, a privacy policy, also known as a privacy notice, is a little link you should see at the bottom of every website, certainly every registration website, which then explains exactly what you do with the data you're going to collect during the registration process. Okay, invitation emails. Don't forget, there's an initial invitation list started somewhere. Where did that data come from? Yeah. So, are you receiving an invitation legally? Under GDPR, there has to be a legal reason for processing your data. Data minimization. So, on the form itself, the registration form, only ask for the data you need. So when you're creating the registration form for the event, are you asking for the address? If you are, why? If you're going to send something, that's fine. But if you're not going to send something, why ask for the address of the delegates? And in the old days, you used to ask for fax machines, fax numbers. Anyone still asking for fax numbers? I hope not. Glad to hear that. So consent, another big word when it comes to GDPR. On the registration form, you need to ask for consent for future marketing purposes. If you want to send a newsletter afterwards, okay, and it has to be granular. So it has to be very specific that you ask a person, can we send you marketing information? If they say no, then you still need to give them admittance to the event. It's just to make sure that you have a process not to send them marketing information afterwards. So you've got reports, you've got sharing data with third parties, which I just talked about in the last slide. Rooming lists, A&D lists, flight manifests, again, in the last slide, we spoke about that. Dietary requirements, so if your registration form is asking for dietary requirements is what's called sensitive data. Okay, so you have to have a higher bar when you're asking for that data and looking after it. And terms and conditions. So most websites have terms and conditions, but GDPR says they have to be separate from your privacy notice. Yeah, terms and conditions are things like if the event is cancelled or you want a refund, this is what you do. Whereas a privacy notice is about this is your data, this is why we collect it, this is how we collect it, this is what we do with it, and when we don't need it, we delete it. That's what a privacy notice is. Okay, so that's the planning stage. So now you're on site. So you walk around an event like this. First thing you did, you gave in your printed piece of paper and you got this. If you think about it, this is probably for this event, your initial registration data, which you filled in on the form, has probably gone to a third party who printed this card. Again, that's your data. Think about it. Has gone to someone else, yeah. And what are they going to do with your data after this event? What GDPR says is that after this event, they need to delete your data because they don't need it anymore. They're a badging company who have printed your badge, and that should be it. Okay, and that's what those contracts where I spoke to earlier on. That's what they define and determine. So you'll see lots of tablets, laptops on site. Are they secure? Yeah. and memory sticks, are they encrypted? Similarly, laptops as well, the data should be encrypted. So GDPR says all personal data should be encrypted at rest and in transit. Okay, so if a laptop is stolen from one of the stands, then at least the data is encrypted, it's secure. I've got clipboard there. That is like a physical, I'm looking around for clipboards because you always have someone with a list of names ticking people off, right? Just be careful with that. It's okay. Don't forget GDPR covers both electronic data as well as printed. Right, so if you've got a printed list of all the delegates and you're walking around, just be very careful what you do with it. Yeah, because don't forget, that's personal data which someone can use for their own uses. System integration. So to combat some of the problems which we have with data being, so like, I'm sure it's quite common, most of you will download data from one system and then possibly import it into another system. So maybe from your registration list you download and then you import it into an email marketing tool. All right. So don't forget, you've downloaded data. There's now 2 copies. Yeah, there's the original copy on the system and the spreadsheet, which you then upload into another system, but that spreadsheet is still there. Now, if you send that spreadsheet to a third party, that spreadsheet, which is a list of all the attendees at this event, is now in your sent items. And it's also in the inbox of the person you're sending it to, right? So that person at the other end might process your data and make a copy of it. So there's another version, another copy. And then we know event attendee lists keep changing. So we can go through the whole cycle again. And for one event, you might end up with 10s, 20s, 30s of event lists or attendee lists, all used by different people, all shared via email, all in your sent items and inboxes. So that's the sort of thing you just need to be very careful of and understand what you're doing with respect to personal data and sharing it. So any sort of integration or system integration helps reduce that, and that's something that you should be looking at if you can possibly go down that line. Okay, so you got on-site. So as I mentioned, you're walking around, you're being scanned wherever you go. That's your data is going to someone else. What do they do with it? Yeah, and they just need to think that through. Okay, so after the event, quite common to receive a feedback email. There might be some financial settlements required, and then business intelligence, or in other words, reports. Yeah, you can do detailed reports. Sometimes you use third parties for reports. So you might give all your report data, event data to a third party. Again, you need to think through for what purpose, yeah, and also whether that data identifies people or whether it's anonymized. Okay, so the key thing is that if the data is anonymized, it means you cannot trace it back to an individual person. Yeah, but if it's the actual individual person, then you have to think about giving it a higher level of security. So many reports, if you're going to do some sort of reports on the number of delegates who came from this town, as an example, what you would do with the data is you would delete all the names and addresses and just keep the field for the town or the city. So that is what's called anonymized data. Yeah, but if you send the whole delegate list to a marketing company where you only want a report on towns and cities, then you're giving them much more data than you actually need to. So think about anonymize the data before you share it with a third party, and think about what you want the data for, what it's actually going to be used for. Okay, so that's very briefly walking through the events lifecycle. I'll take questions in a minute. Just one final slide. So key takeaways. Just think about whose data is it? Yeah. One simple example, I guess most people here use Facebook. Okay. So when you use Facebook, it's your data. Right? So we had some incidents earlier this year about Facebook allowing third parties to take your data and use it for other purposes. In fact, something similar happened in the news yesterday. I won't get to the detail right now. Yeah. So it's your data on Facebook. Yeah. And Facebook is accountable for looking after managing your data and using it in a legal way, right, in a correct way. And it has to be transparent with what it does with the data. So in future, if Facebook does want to sell the data to a third party, they need your consent. That is what transparency is about. All right? Similarly, as event planners, it's exactly the same for you, because you're then holding other people's data. So whose data is it? It's their data. You are accountable for it, and you must handle it transparency within the guidelines of GDPR. Finally, Phylum, our company is a GDPR privacy management consultant. Anyone got any questions, any advice, by all means feel free to ask me. Contact details. And just one other thing, GDPR didn't end on the 25th of May. Okay, it started and it's a long journey, but it's the new normal. So that's the way we look at it. So now for all your businesses, GDPR has to be an integral part of your induction plan, your training plan, your recruitment process throughout the whole organization. And it's a change in culture of how you think about personal data. Cool. Any questions? Yeah.
Great session. So we'll go straight to the most popular question first, which is, what's your interpretation of legitimate interest and how to apply it to B2B event marketing?
How many hours do we have? Legitimate interest. So I've done a separate session complete altogether on legitimate interest. What I would say is that within the event sector, legitimate interest is your friend. Okay? Don't get too head up on consent. Most people just think about consent and think, oh no, I don't have consent, I don't have proper consent. Okay? Legitimate interest for your sector, for the event sector, allows you, right? The key thing is that, first of all, think through using the data under legitimate interest. I won't explain what it is for right now, but obviously people have an idea, right? Think through and create what's called a legitimate interest assessment, a very simple 3-part test. Yeah, and if you say within that test, yes, I do need to process the data for this purpose, that's fine, but then put it on your privacy notice on your website, explain why you are using legitimate interest to process data in a certain way. One simple example of legitimate interest would be this event. Yeah, let's assume all of you attended last year. The event organizers would have a legitimate interest in contacting you and inviting you to attend this year's event. Okay, but if you don't attend this year, then the question is, next year, do they still have a legitimate interest to contact you? Yeah, there's no fixed answer, there's no yes or no. All right, but as long as you can justify your decision, then you can use legitimate interest to contact people.
Thanks very much, great answer there. Can you address the issues around event pictures with delegates, please?
About?
Event pictures.
I can try. Generally, the answer is, unless it's specific of a person who is clearly identifiable, then you need their consent. So, but if for example, I took a general picture here and posted it on my LinkedIn, okay. Now, I tend not to do that because it's a bit of a grey area. But from what my understanding is, and it's a grey area for everyone, is as long as you're not specifically identifying people for a particular purpose and it's a general photo, then that falls under legitimate interest. Now, if someone objects, someone comes up to you and says, I don't want my photo on there, then you would take that off. So my tendency is I wouldn't do a photo like this. I might do a photo generally of there, which is not identifying people. This is much more specific. So it's a grey area. So that's how I would answer that.
So worth erring on the side of caution with some of those areas there.
And generally, less is more. Err on the side of caution. Less data, the better. The more you delete, the better. The less you capture, the better. Right, so definitely less is more.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions here, which is great. So on consent, can you have opt-out consent in the privacy notice?
You have opt-out consent on the form, but not in the privacy notice. In the privacy notice, you would have the legal basis for processing data, and you would say consent is one of those legal bases. But on the form itself, you have to have an actual tick box saying, yes, I consent to receive marketing material or for this XY purpose, or for my data to be shared with the suppliers here. Okay, but generally, you wouldn't have a tick box for that.
Thanks. Can you explain more what needs to be included in terms and conditions regarding GDPR? It's probably quite a big one, that, is it?
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a 3-hour one. You can talk to me afterwards on that one.
Yeah, we'll take that one
A lot.
to the side. Does sharing data containing numeric unique identifiers, such as a reg code, classify as anonymized?
What you need to do is, again, anonymization. Yeah, you cannot identify a person from anonymization. Yeah, there's another thing which is just as difficult to pronounce, which is pseudonymization, and that is when you're creating, say, an application, rather than using the name of a person, you use a number. Yeah, and then you put the name over here. Right, so you've got the number here and the name here, and you keep the two separate. So then if you just distribute the number, you can't identify the person unless you've got the other data. So that is considered much better, right, and much more safer than if you just had the name, right? So anonymization, you cannot identify at all. Pseudonymization, you can, but you need, it's a safer way of managing data. So try and use pseudonymized data as much as you can rather than actual people's names.
Great answer there, thank you. So how should we store prospect research lists when consent is not yet gained to add these prospects to the database?
You might have legitimate interest, so do that legitimate interest test, right? Generally, if you don't have consent, yeah, you should have sought consent before the 25th of May, so that is gone. Yeah. So now think about situation. The example I gave you just now about attending this event last year, you might be able to use legitimate interest to be able to use that data. Yeah. And the other thing is, if you use, if it's B2B marketing, you can do quite a lot with legitimate interest. And don't forget, if you do any marketing, always give them the opt-out or unsubscribe on every email, as well as a link to your privacy policy, which many people don't have. They have the opt-out, but have a link to your privacy policy as well at the same time.
Thank you. And this is probably a good one to end on. I think it's the last question we've got. For pictures, what about high-profile speakers who are in the public domain, such as MPs? Do you need their consent?
Okay. So people like myself, my pictures on the website because I consented. All the speakers here. Yeah, and generally speakers tend to do that. They realize that we're here for marketing purposes, so it's their consent. They're only here. You only have those pictures because of consent. Yeah, so in those cases, it's generally okay. Of course, if they don't consent, then you can't have their pictures on the website.
Thanks very much. That's all the questions. So thanks very much, Arvi. Is there anybody that wants to ask a question the old-fashioned way before we wrap up?
I'm hanging around here. If anyone got any questions, by all means, feel free to ask.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for a great session.
Thanks.
And for those of you in the app, there is a feedback form. You'll see it. It's the third icon along on your app, and we'll be sharing all that data with the team at Eventec Live afterwards. So they'd really appreciate if you could answer the very short feedback survey. Thank you very much.